first and foremost, our impact management webinars here are really designed to provide you with best practices and insights that you can immediately apply to your work, regardless of where you or your organization may be in your technology journey. Today, we're going to specifically be discussing actionable strategies for improving how you can tell the story of your impact with our in-house expert and product manager, Molly Kraus, who I'll let introduce herself in a little bit. But you can expect our conversation to go for around 20 minutes, after which we're going to take some questions. Again, please use that Q&A section rather than the chat, just to make sure they don't get lost. And by the end of our time today, we hope you really feel more comfortable and confident telling your 2024 data story. I honestly cannot believe we are having a webinar about like wrapping up the year. I feel like somehow the end of this year came and go in a minute. I don't know if anybody else feels the same, but here we are, and we're super excited about this topic. And we've done a session with Molly in the past, and I can promise you you're in for a treat because Molly is an absolute wealth of knowledge. So without further ado, Molly, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate you hopping on for this webinar. And before we begin with kind of the meat of this conversation, I was hoping you could tell us a little bit more about yourself, more about your role at Bonterra, and your experience in the nonprofit and public sectors that brings you here.
Yeah, of course. Hi, Amanda. Thanks for having me for the webinar today. My name is Molly Kraus. So happy to see everyone here. And as you mentioned, I am a product manager here at Bonterra. So for those who might not be familiar with this role, broadly speaking, product managers work to define the vision for the product, right, Bonterra software, by gathering feedback to understand user experiences and by working with engineering teams to guide the product development process. The focal area of the team that I work with is building the reporting tools that are used by our customers to facilitate working with their data to get an understanding of the services provided and to measure and demonstrate their program impact. So prior to joining Bonterra, I was the executive director of a university-based research and evaluation team that I was contracted to for over a decade to develop and oversee a data collection infrastructure that was for a city-led community violence intervention project. And for this work, I was a user myself of Bonterra's impact management software and a system administrator. In that role, I worked closely with both city representatives and community-based organizations providing direct services throughout the city of Los Angeles to both train and support staff in their use and understanding of these data systems. We followed a mission to really connect research and practice through the implementation of data feedback loops. And those data feedback loops function to utilize data to improve approaches to service delivery over time. So fundamentally, what brings me here to Bonterra is that I believe that what can be learned from impact management data about the work conducted can empower organizations to make informed decisions, to facilitate an understanding of approaches that may need revision, and of course, to illustrate success. So at Bonterra, I love that I can be involved on a broader scale with working to provide effective tools to organizations to use so that they can also tell the story of their impact through their data.
Awesome. Thank you, Molly. Appreciate you sharing just a little bit of background here. And I know that you're coming to this conversation, kind of as you mentioned, with a ton of really helpful experience, right? And a lot of information and frameworks that help both nonprofits and public sector agencies to tell the story of their impact, right? And so before we get into, some of those frameworks, et cetera, let's start with kind of the backup a little bit, a couple of essentials, right? So first and foremost, like, why does this matter? Why should folks be focusing on this data story? And then why does it seem to be so hard?
Oh, that's such a great question, and really something that I have been thinking about for quite some time. So there, just on a number of levels at which using data to really tell that impact story can be challenging. To begin with, working with and understanding data can just feel hard, especially if it isn't your primary area of focus. It can feel really stressful when the expectations around telling an impact story using data are high, and this can be particularly true when this is tied to funding. right? There can also be the fear that looking into the data might bring things to light that may not be working the way that we expect. For example, right, looking at your data may highlight gaps in services, or you may learn that a higher percentage of participants are dropping out rather than completing your programming successfully. Also, knowing what to do with and how to approach your data can be really challenging. How do you identify the components of the story that you want to tell, right? How do you know what your data has to say? But your question had two parts. Why can it be difficult to tell your data story, which we've talked about a little bit, but also why does it really matter that we do? Well, using data to tell your organization's impact story provides a credible foundation for the work that you've done. It helps to gain buy-in from your audience. For example, a couple of years ago, I started trying to use less single-use plastic. And I order some things from more sustainable packaging from a company that I have on an app. Well, at some point, they added a little dashboard that shows how many single-use plastic bottles had been avoided by everyone in the community by purchasing items that avoid single-use plastic. And it is close to 8.5 million. And I get to see my own personal impact too, right? My 940 water bottles. So seeing those numbers makes me feel really good. But it also encourages me and helps me to understand how the company is fulfilling its own mission. And it encourages me to continue both making purchases and to stay engaged with the work that is being done. It encourages me to participate. So seeing the impact broken down in a way that's easy for me to understand is a really great way to tell that story. And it can also show me how I am contributing to it and gives me some information that I can share with others who may be interested in being part of a similar initiative. So using data to illustrate impact becomes a very important part of both showing us what we achieve and connecting with those who support the work that we are doing.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for sharing. It's a fun story. And honestly really like kind of brings it into light, right? And shows that how important that impact is and that understanding. But I know for a lot of folks, like I hear on webinars all the time, right? Like this is great, but where do I start? Right. And folks really just, we take these broad concepts and it can feel overwhelming and not really sure kind of what to do. So do you think you could give some guidance on what steps agencies can be taking to kind of get started?
Oh, yeah, definitely. So from my perspective, in order to best leverage data to tell that impact story, it's going to be necessary to really know your data, really understand the work that your organization does and what it is looking to accomplish, and to work closely with practitioners to gain insight into the nuances of what the data may show. So a great place to start is really right around that getting to know your data. And from the context that we are now in early December, and we are fast approaching the end of the year and moving rapidly into that annual reporting season, I'm going to focus a little bit on work that you can start to do now in order to get ready to tell your organization's impact story for 2024. So there is absolutely no time like the present to start taking a look at the data that you have and thinking about the questions that you want to be able to use it to answer. So what metrics are you collecting that have meaning for your programming and the impact that you would like to see? What measures are available within your data to answer these questions? I always like to start this process of looking and getting to know my data by taking a really straightforward look at what was available and seeing if anything surprised me. So really looking at like individual questions and those like the percentage of responses in the breakdown and seeing, right, are there outliers that I can identify? What it doesn't align with what I would expect to see? Am I seeing things in the data that I cannot explain? If possible, it can be really helpful to compare with what you're seeing for this year to the year before, right? Are those numbers substantially different? Is the data showing you what you would expect to see based upon your knowledge of both the services that are provided and any programmatic changes that you know have occurred over the past 12 months? So finding these outliers may mean a couple of different things, right? One thing that we always have to consider is that we may be identifying some places where there are some corrections or cleaning that may be necessary due to data entry errors that we should probably address in order to effectively begin to work with the data. Right. The second option is that something may have changed within the way service is delivered or how programming is applied, and that is now being reflected within your data. So both of these areas are really worthwhile to note and to start to investigate further or address as you move forward, right? So again, that's a place you can get started on today, right? You can give yourself a gift of cleaner data for a Christmas present this year. Uh, for example, right, if your data shows that since 2010, no more than 100 participants, say, enrolled in your program each year, but when you look at your data for 2024, you see that you have 150 participants who've enrolled, right? That's quite a substantial increase in your number of participants served. So you might want to investigate if this change is due to, right, an error in how enrollments have been entered, or if something else has changed that has led to that increase. Right? Was the age range of participants increased, broadening the pool of individuals who might be eligible for services? Did your organization find a larger space to hold groups, and that allowed you to increase class size and serve more participants? So we really want to start asking those questions, digging in and understanding what drives those numbers. So understanding and articulating those changes become part of what your 2024 impact story becomes.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, right? And a great, to your point, like a place that folks can start today, right? Like you can kind of leave this, look into your next week and start diving into that data. So, I think the next natural step, Molly, right, is, say I'm an agency or a nonprofit and I identify, an area that I then want to look into, right? I kind of say, oh, this seems like an outlier, or this is a really substantial increase or decrease, right? How do you approach this, or how can I kind of then take that next step to kind of do that deeper dive?
Yeah, definitely. So we're going in that direction. I am a proponent of the idea that a really incredibly effective way to learn more about what might be driving change is by bringing together the individuals with the professional expertise, right, that can contribute to these discussions around the data through having an ongoing research to practice feedback loop process. So I cannot tell you how many times I have looked at data with practitioners to understand what the data is showing and have found incredibly rich narratives that have contributed to why the data looks the way that it does. So for example, right, in a data feedback loop process that I ran several years ago, we noticed in the data that for one organization, participants identifying as female were dropping out at far higher rates than participants who are identifying as male, right? So that's a number that we were seeing within the data. But we needed to understand why that was happening. So after bringing this finding to the organization and discussing what might be driving the metric, the case management team was able to almost immediately connect that metric to the fact that their staffing had changed. And at that point, most of the case management team was male, and they had no female specific services or amenities that were being provided in-house. So the team then for the next year identified a goal of increasing engagement with female participants by adding a girls group to the programming that they offered. And over time, not only were they able to improve, right, retention, but the group also became a new source of referrals as participants began to bring in their friends. So, right, to summarize that, after looking at your data, it is always worthwhile to connect with the individuals who are providing the services, right? The individuals who are entering the data, who are running the programs, to share what you're seeing and get feedback regarding what the data shows and understand that narrative. So data feedback loops, right? It may feel a little like, oh my gosh, how do we start to look at this data? It's something that can really take many forms. It doesn't need to be a large undertaking, right? Starting with a single question can really encourage a rich conversation, right? Something as simple as, hey, we're looking at those who are exiting our programs, and we see that, females have a higher percentage of unsuccessful exits than do males. So it's not like an intense data analysis, but it does enable you to ask a question about the way the programming is being delivered. So sometimes it can also even be the lack of responses to a certain question that says volumes about the impact of the program. So for example, right, if you're looking at types of services that are provided, you may notice that one type of service is much lower than the other offerings. So that may be a great opportunity to identify, right, increasing that service as a future growth area, or perhaps it means needing to reassess what services are provided to really focus on those that are doing well, right? And see what makes sense to offer to participants.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so, kind of moving into the next stage, right? Like, you've talked to those participants, you've talked to the folks kind of, on the ground, those entering the data, et cetera. You now know your data, right? You've kind of done the daunting thing, and you understand the results. So now, once we have that understanding, what are some best practices and approaches that an organization might want to follow for presenting that data then to funders and other stakeholders?
Yeah, I love it, right? We've done the thing. We've started to look into our data. We've collected some of our narrative, and then we're ready, right, to say something about our impact. So I think the approach varies a bit depending on the expectations are for what we're presenting back, right? So for example, in some instances, we might be having like a standardized quarterly report for a funder, and there may not be a lot of room to get creative in the presentation. But if we're thinking more specifically, perhaps about producing our 2024 annual impact report, something that we might want to share right on our organization's website publicly, or maybe we're talking about something internally that we want to be able to provide to our directors, our funders, or other stakeholders. That's really where we can be more, like have more creative control around how we present the data. And there are a few things that I would suggest. So first, in order to tell the story of your impact with your data, right, identifying the numbers and narratives that have meaning for your organization. So those areas that can be enumerated and connected back to your organization's mission or goals. So here I would also encourage you to think about impact at various levels and see, right, where you might be able to make a personal connection. So going back to my earlier example of seeing my own impact of my 940 plastic water bottles avoided, is there a way that you can frame your data to help a funder understand the impact they have had by supporting your work? Other impact layers may also, include areas such as asking, what is the impact of your work in 2024, right, on the individual participants receiving services? Or is there a larger community impact? Second, I've mentioned both numbers and narratives a couple of times, but I do just want to call out the importance of including both of these things together and really using a little bit of narrative to set the context for the reader so that the funder, stakeholder, et cetera, can really understand why the number being presented is important for the work that you are doing. So combining the numbers with narrative is important to include in order to best achieve the storytelling aspect of impact reporting. These two components woven together can provide a robust look into what an organization is doing and the impact that it has, right? Those stories are really what start to connect us emotionally and provide the why behind the numbers, while the numbers give the credibility to the story that we're telling and can serve to succinctly demonstrate our impact. Third, I would recommend, if this is something you're not doing already, to get in the habit of having a central place to keep track of any programmatic changes, adjustments to your data collection, or external events that may have impacted your service over the course of the year. This can be a great point of reference when you're looking back and may also provide some of that narrative context as you look to understand your data and tell your impact story. Additionally, right, that list of changes, adjustments can also include things that you may want to celebrate or highlight that you know are coming up. So for example, if you are moving to a new facility with more space for on-site appointments, or if you're building new partnerships as referral sources, these are worthwhile points to note as those developments may impact the state of your data in the coming year, right, by providing those new referral sources or increasing the number of individuals that can be served. Right, again, referring back to my earlier example of noticing an increase in numbers of participants enrolled in a program during 2024, right? Both having more group space and having a new referral partner could definitely provide the narrative context that would tell the story of that change. So in fact, these points may even be goals for how your organization wants to grow, maybe something that you can continue to show with your data in the following year. Finally, I think it's really worth noting that we live in a visual world, and I would recommend incorporating data visualizations when possible. Fortunately, there are so many great options for building charts and graphs that you can incorporate into data dashboards and report now, but great visuals can provide really key pieces of information succinctly and really help us to better understand what our data is showing and provide that additional context to highlight a point we want to make. In addition to those charts and graphs, I am a fan of working with a graphic designer, right? Get your expert in when it makes sense based on the type of document you're producing, right? A great graphic designer can really help you figure out like what icons, what fonts, how you can differently size various key points to really introduce like that wow fake factor and make your numbers and your narrative pop for the reader.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing all of those practices. I know that was a lot, so I'll let you catch your breath for a minute because those a lot of awesome kind of actionable steps for folks to take and really insightful. So really appreciate you kind of diving into those, providing those examples. And kind of before we turn into the Q&A portion of this conversation, I wanted to know, Molly, if you had any final thoughts or guidance that you'd like to share with, maybe some of the nonprofit leaders here who are seeking to refine their approach to impact measurement.
Sure. I have always gotten more thoughts on how we can work with our data, Amanda. So, I think one of the things I would really like to add is that the more exposure we have to our data, the more familiar with it that we become, the more that we integrate conversation about the data into our practice, the better our opportunities to use it become, and the more effectively we can understand how service delivery can be improved, the more we can learn about our impact, and the more effectively that impact can be communicated. So I think building a culture, of really living with and working with and using your data, not only when you need to report out, but sort of as an ongoing part of the work that is done within an organization. I will add for orgs, that have that upcoming annual reporting that they're looking to complete, Again, there's no time like the present to start taking action on those items. So start understanding what data you have available, knowing the state that your data may be in, What do you need to clean? What do you need to understand? Start making that short list of items so you can hit the new year running, and identifying the areas that you want to be able to best illustrate your impact, that say what you've done, What have you completed in 2024? I think finally that sometimes reporting and that use of data can be viewed as a task that is really disconnected from the services that are being delivered, unfortunately. But I do think that if there is a good system in place that we are annually and throughout the year finding opportunities to discover what the data can tell us about programming and connecting to those narratives, then we have a rich narrative and can really truly create an impact story that results our organizational efforts.
Yeah, thank you. It really is all about that impact story, right? And data being kind of the driver to tell it, right? And using that. And I know data is your favorite topic, so you may be biased, but I know that I've seen it and heard it as well. And so really appreciate kind of all of the insights that you were able to provide and some of the tips to folks on this call right now. We'll get into some of the Q&A, some of the questions that were asked here in a second. I did see a question come in from an audience member before we get into maybe some of the more actionable ones of what sustainability app are you using? We have some interested fans who might want to use it as well.
Shopping together. It's Grove, It's they really highlight all of the products that are plastic bottle free, and I do really like that dashboard, I have to say.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing. Hopefully, I think we're doing some free advertising for them. I think they might get a couple of extra subscribers today.
I'll see you all there.
We can all compare dashboards on our next webinar. See how everyone's doing.
Perfect.
Thank you. Appreciate you sharing that. Now, kind of getting into maybe some of the more data-focused questions that I saw come in. This one actually kind of just came in around the last talking point that you were covering in your kind of best practices about those visuals or graphics, right? And so somebody asked, what are some key factors that we should consider when selecting the right visuals or graphics to present our data effectively in reports?
Yeah, I think that can feel like such a challenge. So again, right, I think if you have access to a graphic designer, this is a great place to use them, right, to engage with your designer, especially if you're producing like a larger report or an evaluation document. But if that isn't a possibility, I would say that the reporting tools that are right available within like a data visualization tool, like even Excel, right, has gotten a lot savvier. So I would say turn to the tools that you have, right? See right within Bonterra's impact management software what is available to you and really begin the process from there. So I think, again, right, selecting the right visual also is tied back to that knowing your data, right? So once you know your data, know what you want to say with your data, I have really found that that the job of choosing the right way to visualize that data becomes a little bit simpler, right? Because it is part of the story of the metric that you're trying to visualize.
Yeah.
Sometimes we don't want to overcomplicate it. Sometimes having right a great powerful icon with like a big number underneath is also a really great choice, right? It's something that pops. You're like 150 right participants enrolled this year, but it doesn't need to be a really complicated chart or graph if you don't feel comfortable working in that area. So graphics, I think, can be really tricky to get right. But overall, I would say whatever approach you choose to you take to producing visuals for your report, make sure that what you're including is really clearly and appropriately labeled, and make
Mm-hmm.
sure that what you're including is paired with that contextual narrative that we've talked about. So it could be as simple as having a really good title and a really good subtitle so that your readers understand without, needing to really dig deeply what you're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's really all about kind of that captivation and what's going to grab that attention and get you interested. I'm personally a really big fan of the big numbers. It's so simple yet so effective.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
so appreciate you sharing that. Kind of a question that came in now. I'm trying to maybe lump some together. Some folks kind of looking at the maybe the less positive side of things, right, of saying, kind of what are the common pitfalls that folks face when they're trying to implement effective impact reporting, and how might they be able to avoid them?
Yeah, that is a big question, right? I think so. Reporting overall can take many forms, and if we're building a report for use within our organization, if we're using software or if we're creating right like a larger evaluation report, we have different goals and objectives. But I do think that overall, right, when we're thinking about how we want to communicate our impact out, that one of the best ways to implement this is to have a focused purpose for your report, right? You really want to know how that report is going to be used and to know who your audience is, because that is going to help to color, right, the information that you include. Uh, Practice and data, again, right, don't always go naturally together for everyone. So I do think it's incredibly important that the data you're collecting is purposeful for demonstrating the impact that you are looking to achieve, right? So this, again, it's I think really foundational, right? Your report, your impact cannot be shown if we do not have the right data foundation in place to begin with. So we really need to set our data foundationally and understand what we want to be able to get out of it to show our impact so that we can start to dig into the areas that we've discussed today, right? So just keeping an eye out for data entry errors, working with practitioners to understand those narratives. I think those points are all predicated upon the fact that we have, right, a data foundation in place. So it may go back to, right, like the biggest thing that we have to set up to avoid any pitfalls would be foundationally building a structure for data within our organization. Another point that I would add to that is like be a champion for your data, right?
Mm-hmm.
I know some of us are the data people, some of us are not the data people. Before I joined Bonterra, when I'd be presenting data findings back to practitioners, someone would inevitably ask me why I was so excited about the data, right? As you pointed out, Amanda, I do love the data. I think it can right add so much to communicating out our impact. And I would always say, well, someone has to be excited about the data, and right and then we would look at the data, and I would really try to work to get everyone else excited about the data too. So I do think it's important, right, that we have someone who wants right, to enjoy the data and to look at that together and to dig in and see what it has to say, so that we do have that data that is connected to our practice. Because if that is seamless, right, and we know that our data is really able to demonstrate the work that we are doing, I think it can help us to avoid many of those pitfalls, right? Finally, I'm really surprised to hear how often a data system is really built and then never revisited. In my opinion, it is really a critically important thing in telling an impact story, right? Again, that your data aligns with work as it is delivered. So if it's been a couple of years since you've kind of addressed what measures you're collecting, now might be the time, right? 2025 might be the year to go back and take a look and say, has our work changed? Right? Are there different measures that I need to add? Are there different response options I can add to a question that will help me to speak to my impact more effectively? So I think going back and adjusting that when there are changes in programming, right, or even external changes is a great way that you can ensure that your data shows your impact in the way that you desire.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Molly, for sharing that. Super helpful answer to the question. I know some folks were kind of asking about those challenges. We had another question come up while you were answering just about addressing challenges. And so I'm hoping you might have a response for this one of folks who are saying that we've kind of encountered a difficulty to capture a key metric. For them, they were saying our example is measuring kind of the percent of application adoption by users. So folks are wondering, like, if you have any tips on how to either capture some of those more difficult metrics and how to align your stakeholders on a definition or calculation, right? So getting all those folks, like you were saying, excited about data, how do you get them kind of aligned on what that metric should be and what they should be following?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think there are a lot of ways we could go in a response, but I think fundamentally, right, like with any type of data, with any work that you're doing, to when you are building that work, to be incorporating what you want to be able to say about that work when you start, right? So that when we are right providing a new service or we are right like having a new application, we want to look at adoption, right? Of anything. I was just opening up the Q&A and we're saying, right, how do we even show that right, we're serving more clients, right, because we have the space there. So I think it's just starting to bring this lens to our work that says, right, that flags those things for us. And I think this is where the idea of, right, keeping a list of things that may have changed or keeping a list of things that we want to do and building in our own awareness of how we can build in data that helps us, right, to better capture things going forward. So I think, right, there are some ways you can kind of go back if you don't have a specific measure, right? You can use narrative to kind of supplement some of those things, right? We can allegorically tell the story. We can talk to our participants. We can talk to, right, our service providers. We can talk to our customers, right? And we can grow our knowledge of the way that people are using things and their experiences as well. So I think that's a great way to sort of, if we don't have a specific measure, right, we can learn from the individuals who are having those experiences around what we can say.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And for one of these specific examples here in the questions, if you're using that narrative, right, and you're kind of working towards that data, is that still something kind of maybe putting a bow on this conversation that folks should include in their 2024 reporting? Or should they wait until they have kind of that concrete metric?
You know, I think that is a little bit up to each organization, right? I think that's a kind of choose your own adventure aspect to things. I would say there are places where, right, a metric might be something you want to wait for, right? If you know you have a change coming up and you know you want to build something and it's not quite there yet, then that may be a good candidate to wait. But right, if you are building something in, I think there are places where, you know, you can use your data and say, hey, like we're capturing these things, but we want to know more. And so looking forward into 2025, right, we are going to be seeing like what we can do to incorporate learning in this area, right? I think you can talk about the ways that you want to be able to speak to your, right, to your changes, to your efforts over time as well.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. I don't see any other questions that have come in through the Q&A. So before I kind of say thank yous and log off, I'll ask a question back at folks, which is just that if you are looking for specific tools that might be able to help you tell a better data story, have that collection, et cetera, have that reporting capability, and you want to explore something like Bonterra and our tools, I'll leave a poll up really quickly on the screen. If you want to learn more, you just got to hear from the brains behind the products here now. So if you're excited by kind of what Molly's approach is and thought process is, and you want to learn just more about what we're doing here, I'll leave that up for, again, a couple of quick moments. But I wanted to just draw attention to you, Molly, to the thank yous coming in through the chat. And just express my gratitude for you being here today, sharing your experience and your expertise to the audience here, both those who are live and those who might be watching this on their own time when they get the recording. But just really appreciate it. And I hope that the folks who joined, whether you're a nonprofit or a public agency, you feel a little bit more confident in your end of your data storytelling and kind of approaches that you can take here immediately and what to start thinking about for next year. So we really appreciate all of the work that you're doing. Appreciate that y'all joined us for these 40 minutes here. We really certainly appreciate it and hope to see you on our future webinars. And if we don't see you in a future webinar before the end of the year, which is crazy, have a happy new year. But if we do, we'll see you for one or two more. But again, Molly, thank you so much. Really appreciate you taking the time to share. And I hope everyone has a great rest of their day.
Agreed. Thanks all for attending today, and have fun taking a look and digging into your data.
All right. Take care, folks. Bye-bye.